Joining me today is Derek Kitchen. He has declared as a candidate for Congress here in Utah, former state senator. We're going to talk to him today about why he's running and the pitch he's going to be making to Democratic and the other voters in the districts. Senator Kitchen, it's nice to have you on board today.
Brian, it's great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me on the show, and I'm excited to talk about this race.
First thing I want to ask you before we get into the candidacy, what have you been up to since you left the Utah Senate? I know you've been doing some work in Washington. I think you worked a little bit for the Biden administration, but I'm curious as to what you've been up to. So catch us up on that.
So I wrapped up my time in the Utah State Senate in 2022. And right after I left office, I received a phone call from then President Biden's administration, the White House, inviting me to join the team and help execute on the big vision of the Democratic executive branch, and invited me to join the team in Washington. And so in April of 2023, I joined President Biden at the Export-Import Bank. It's a small federal agency. Not a lot of people know about it, but it's super powerful. What it does is it promotes America's global interests to countries all over the world. So a lot of supply chain work, a lot of global trade. It helps small companies compete, especially as it relates to China and Russia and some of our global adversaries. And so for me, I was able to serve in a political role as a presidential appointee, helping to carry out that big vision. And so I was on the road quite a bit. I met with nearly 27 different governors and mayors and elected officials at the state and local level, with the priority of advancing America's commercial diplomacy interests around the world. As you probably know, China is investing pretty heavily in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. And they're really tying up a lot of our global supply chains. And so the United States has a little bit of catching up to do. And through the Export-Import Bank, where I was serving, we were able to really meaningfully jump into not only the supply chain challenges, but to shore up our support with our allies around the world. And so I had a really great time running that operation. I was doing a lot of work on the Hill, so running congressional affairs. So we had, folks that were appointed by President Biden that needed Senate confirmation. And so I was able to Sherpa two folks through the Senate confirmation process, got really involved with not only the Senate Banking Committee, but the House Financial Services Committee, and really dug into commercial diplomacy and trade finance. And, here in Utah, we're growing. As you know, with the inland port and all of the stuff that's going on the western side of Congressional District 1, there's a lot of global ties. And so I was able to bring the Department of State and the Commerce Department out to Utah. We actually visited a variety of political stakeholders out here, but we introduced the State Department to the Mormon Church's Bishop Warehouse and some of their humanitarian work. And so we had a lot of fun serving in the administration. As you might imagine, when we lost the election in 2024, when Kamala Harris was unsuccessful in her bid for the top job, all the Democratic appointed officials wrapped up their service in January. And so I buttoned up my time in DC earlier this year, and I've been settling back into Utah throughout the summer and early fall.
So let's talk about you running for Congress. Easy question for me to ask. I don't know how easy it will be for you to answer, but it's a simple one. I like to ask all candidates: why you? Why now?
I'm running for Congressional District 1 because I've grown up in this community and have such deep affection for the people of this area. Salt Lake City has been without representation in Congress for generations. Certainly in my lifetime, we haven't had anybody that has the strong, coherent voice in Washington on behalf of our values. The legislature over the last number of years has cracked Salt Lake City, and so our voice has been diluted. So I'm running for Congress to bring a strong Democratic voice to Washington on behalf of the residents here in Salt Lake County and District 1. There's a lot of issues that our community is facing right now, from the shrinking Great Salt Lake and the environmental fallout that is sure to follow. Housing, we're a growing state. So, we're going to nearly double in population in the next 30 years or so. A lot of growth. And given that Congressional District 1 is the most dense urban part of the state of Utah, a lot of that growth is going to need to be absorbed in this community. And so we have a lot of challenges when it comes to growth, housing affordability, transportation issues, general cost of living as it relates to childcare and healthcare. And so, I'm running to bring a strong voice on behalf of those concerns to Washington and to fight. Brian, you know me. I cut my teeth in politics when I sued the governor and won. I joined the city council thereafter and fought for affordable housing, had some really good successes with the city council. And then, you and I saw each other a lot when I was serving in the Senate. You know what it's like to be a Democrat in the Utah legislature. Going to Congress on behalf of the people of Utah, when it will hopefully be a majority Democratic caucus next year, be an opportunity to really deliver for the people of Utah.
And that's my next question. It would be a different universe for you. Looking at the trends that we have, of everything we've seen up to this point, and what looks to be shaping up to be not only a Democratic advantage in the 2026 midterms, but almost there's a lot of people now talking about a Democratic wave, maybe even a blue tidal wave. I've seen some projections that the House could have up to 267 Democrats. That would be the majority there. Um, what do you think that you would be able to accomplish as a member of Congress if you were in such a large majority in the House of Representatives? And again, this is all hypothetical, but it's based on the trends we're seeing. What would you be able to accomplish?
Well, assuming that Democrats regain control of the House of Representatives, and I'm a part of that new leadership in the lower chamber, there's a huge obligation on Congress to hold the Trump administration accountable. As you know, they're breaking norms and laws day in and day out, and I think we need to have a Democratic Congress to hold their feet to the fire and to hold them accountable. I'm a big believer in checks and balances and a a divided government where we have an accountability mechanism in place. So the Congress has an obligation to jump in front of the Trump administration and hold them accountable. So I think that's first and foremost, and we would do that as a body, as a whole caucus. And so that's a huge issue that I think any Democrat needs to be a part of. Now, for the first time, having a strong Salt Lake City voice in Congress presents a very unique opportunity to really deliver on things like we have the Colorado River Compact coming up in a couple of years, and so that's going to be a huge issue for the West, broadly speaking. Whoever wins this seat needs to be able to go into the halls of power and effectively negotiate on behalf of the people of Utah and the West more broadly. So I think, I look at infrastructure as a big topic, and we can talk about housing as infrastructure. We could talk about childcare as infrastructure. When the Democrats regain control of the House, we're going to have a real voice in a budget negotiation. We saw what happened just recently, and how sort of Democrats broadly were a little bit concerned with how leadership caved, or at least appeared to cave on the budget. When we control the lower chamber in Congress, we're going to have a much heavier bat to force through our funding priorities. And so when we're talking about childcare or daycare or transportation or water, these are all funding questions. And so we're going to be able to deliver for Utah on the funding in particular.
You keep talking about Salt Lake City having a strong voice. The maps that were thrown out by Judge Diana Gibson split Salt Lake County into four pieces. And as you mentioned, Salt Lake County is the most densely populated part of the state. I guess the question is those statements assume that Salt Lake City is not being represented properly in Congress. Salt Lake County is not being represented properly. And what do you think the difference would be if Salt Lake County, and these maps stand, if Salt Lake County were to have have one representative in Congress rather than it being split among the four districts as it is now?
Well, I would argue that it's objectively true that Salt Lake City voters, based on our values and the folks that we elect to municipal, regional, and state office, which are Democrats and left of center progressives, it's fair to say that we do not have that level of representation among our congressional delegation. As much as I may like Blake Moore, as much as I may appreciate certain things about Celeste Malloy, we do not share the same values. We will not fight for the same things. And so when I say Salt Lake City finally has an opportunity to have a strong voice in Congress, what I mean is we have an opportunity to elect somebody who is not afraid to go toe to toe and to fight for things that matter to the people of Salt Lake and the people of Salt Lake County. So we don't need somebody that's going to waffle or waver on some of these big issues like reproductive health. Okay, like supporting workers and organized labor. We don't need to have a milquetoast version of a Democrat. We need to have somebody who is firm in their beliefs and, quite frankly, Brian, consistent in their political career on some of these issues. And so I think that there's an opportunity to send somebody to Washington to represent Salt Lake and the surrounding suburbs that really stands firm on what we believe in.
What does the ongoing legal drama around the map? What does that do to your ability to campaign? They just moved the filing dates for congressional candidates. Everyone else has to start filing at the beginning of the year. Congressional candidates can start gathering signatures at the beginning of the year, but you can't file for office until until March, and they're hoping that all of the appeals will be wrapped up by then. And the Republican legislature wants a different map in place. What is this doing to your ability to run a campaign? And I guess the second part of that question would be, if this map that's in place right now that has the district centered on Salt Lake County, if that map is not there, do you continue to run?
So we are moving forward in developing this campaign, no matter what the legislature decides to do. As you mentioned, they held a special session last week where they changed the filing deadline, and obviously are trying to appeal the decision from Judge Gibson. Republicans are going to do what Republicans are going to do, and that is in the state of Utah, that is to combat the people. When we gather signatures and put initiatives on the ballot and petition our government, which is our responsibility in a democracy, is to hold our government accountable and to petition and change the law when it's needed and when we're not being heard or represented. That's exactly what the voters have done with Proposition 4. And now you see the legislature fight tooth and nail the voters and the people of this state. Isn't it disappointing to see our elected leadership on Capitol Hill constantly undermine the will of the people? I find it to be completely egregious and really unfortunate, but it's something that we can predict because the legislature has done this for years. The Republican supermajority in the Utah Senate and the Utah House, these guys don't like being told no, quite frankly. And when the voters gather signatures and we vote and we win a majority on an issue, that should be the final word. But instead, the legislature constantly spends our tax dollars to fight what we vote for. And so I think that there's a real misstep and a misalignment in values between the Republican supermajority and the vast majority of Utahns. And so, to your question, we are going to continue building this campaign. I've grown up in this district. I've, spent my entire life in Congressional District 1. And so for me, this is a huge moment to organize people that haven't had a chance to be organized politically before, to, amplify the issues that we haven't really had a voice pushing before. And so we're organizing. Things might change with the legislature, but we cannot sit around and wait for them to tinker with our democracy. We got to continue to get out there and organize and fight for the future.
But I guess the question I would ask is, say that this map, the plaintiff's map that was put in place by Judge Gibson, this map is struck down by a court, and we go to the option C map, which divides Salt Lake County into two, or we go back to the 2021 maps, which divide Salt Lake County into four. Would you still be in the race if either of those maps were in place rather than the one that we have now?
I mean, you're playing with hypotheticals right now. We have a
Yeah.
map and we have candidates that are running for this map. I'm running for this map. I'm running for the seat that we are legally entitled to. I'm running for the map that the people in this state have fought for over the last 7 years. Again, beginning in 2018 with the ballot initiative that passed by the voters of this state. And now we have a map that keeps the communities of interest together and is not dividing the largest city in the state of Utah. Is not cut up. So I'm running for this seat. Now, if the legislature is successful at undermining voters and we are somehow presented with a surprise new map a few weeks or a few months before the election, then we will make a decision at that time. But we're running for office. I think the voters of this community now know what's possible. We know what's possible. And so we're running a campaign to win, not only in this primary, but in the general election come November. And if the map changes, then the map changes, and we'll have a different conversation at that point. But I really don't want to spend too much time spinning our wheels on hypotheticals here when we have a map that we're running for.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. But I have to ask that question. Talk to me about what kind of message you're going to be putting forward to the voters, because I see this. There's two races under the map we have right now. There is the race for the Democratic nomination, in which you'll have to appeal to Democratic voters. But if whoever gets the nomination, this district is Democratic leaning, but it's not Democratic majority. It still has Republicans as the largest block of registered voters, followed by independent candidates, and then followed by Democrats, who are about a quarter of the voters in this district. What is your message that's going to appeal to both Democratic voters who are going to decide the nomination, and should you get the nomination, to a larger universe of voters that includes Republicans and independents?
Partisan leanings that are either left or right. We have a lot of folks that are registered as independents and don't identify with either party. And so whoever wins this primary needs to go on to an effective general election. And that strategy for me is to appeal to independents and Republicans. I grew up in West Jordan, and part of this district is totally encompassed out there. I grew up with Republicans. Many of my family members are Republicans. I remember, my mom and some of her friends talking about Donald Trump in 2016. Okay, so these are voters that I need to be able to attract. These are voters that will vote for me as well. I'll tell you why. My lived experience. I have a unique lived experience compared to some of the other candidates in this race, not only because I grew up in this district, but I'll never forget when I was 15 years old. I was coming out of the closet and I was kicked out of my house and had to move in with my father. Around the same time, my younger brother was diagnosed with childhood cancer. And I'll never forget the challenges between my mom and my dad in terms of affording healthcare. CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Plan, saved my brother's life. It was not a cheap program, but it saved his life. And these are programs that are important to the everyday person in America, not just in Congressional District 1, not just in Utah, but around the country. We have people that are depending on these programs to keep them alive. And so, that sort of experience really colored my understanding of when and how the government should step in and what matters to people. Because whether you voted for Donald Trump, you voted for Hillary Clinton, you voted for Barack Obama, it doesn't matter. These voters know what's possible and what's needed when they fall on hard times. And I think that the government has an obligation to ensure a safe, healthy experience for American citizens. And right now we're failing too many Americans. Today's the 15th of December. It's the deadline for the marketplace, health insurance marketplace. So if you don't have health insurance now, you're not going to have an opportunity to buy on the marketplace until next year. What we're seeing is at the end of this month, December 31st, if Congress fails to act and extend the the Obamacare subsidies, we're going to see massive increases into our premiums. And that's not just me and you, Brian. That's a huge chunk of American society are seeing their premiums go up. So while on the one hand, you have our government focused on tax breaks for billionaires and corporations, we see everyday people getting squeezed by our government. And so it doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum. People are feeling that squeeze very acutely right now.
Derek Kitchen, where can people find you online and find out more about your campaign?
Well, follow me on social media for sure. I have a website, derekkitchen.com, but I'm out and about in the community. So when you see me out, please say hello and let's talk about the issues.
Derek Kitchen, Democratic candidate for Congress. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, Brian. Thanks.